Hello, horror hounds. At the recommendation of one of you lovely lot, Rachel Sullivan to name names, this very morning, for the first time, I watched Dead and Buried from 1981. Thank you so much for the recommendation. The first question I have is, how the hell is this not all over top 10 lists of horror movies from the 80s like a frickin' rash? How have I never heard of this before? Rachel's recommendation came off the back of a video I did talking about a movie called Deathline, known as Raw Meat in the United States, directed by Gary Sherman, and I just mentioned that I knew that he'd also directed Poltergeist 3, but nothing else, and she said he's done this fantastic film called Dead and Buried, and maybe you're all out there going, Jesus, Andrew, like, get with the frickin' program. Yes, everyone knows about Dead and Buried, everyone's seen Dead and Buried. But I honestly, I'd never come across it. If, like me, you're ridiculously behind the curve and you're watching this and you haven't seen the film, I'm going to completely lay off spoilers. I'm going to pretty much completely lay off talking about anything that happens in the film at all, because I would sincerely like as many of you to discover this film the way I did, off the back of a recommendation, knowing next to nothing about it, and just letting the twists and turns, revelations, developments hit you as they were intended. I'm going to link to the trailer in the description field. If you have not seen the film, do not watch the trailer, because if you watch the trailer, you will pretty much have watched the entire film. As far as the setup of the movie is concerned, I am only going to give you the first sentence from the back of the DVD cover, and only then, because it's the revelation probably in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Something very strange is happening in the quiet coastal village of Potter's Bluff. Actually, no. I'm going to give you the first half of the first sentence. You don't need to know any more about it. Welcome to Potter's Bluff. A new way of life. That's what it says on the sign that welcomes you to this coastal town. And I've got to say, one of the many things I love about this film, it's fog-laden, gloomy atmosphere. It's obviously filmed in a real coastal town. It feels like a real community. No sets, real locations, lived in. I believe that the people that populate the place actually live there. To my mind, for that aspect alone, it would make a fantastic double feature with John Carpenter's The Fog, a sort of coastal resorts with a secret double bill. If you want some other touch points, things that I was reminded of while I was watching it, so that we can talk around the film rather than about specifics, just another couple of sort of towns or villages with secrets. So the Stepford Wives and the Wicker Man definitely sprung to mind. But if you're a fan of The Fog, and if you're a fan of 80s practical effects and gore, this is the movie for you. Did I mention that the effects were done by Stan Winston, by the way? There's another parallel with The Fog here. Reading up about the movie just after I'd watched it, I'd heard that Gary Sherman, the director, he actually intended for this to be slightly more of a dark comedy, and the producers wanted more kills and more gore. So there was a slight tension there, and I think more blood was put in. Exactly the same thing happened with The Fog. John Carpenter, if you remember, he started off his career with thrillers, with suspense, with tension. Even Halloween is a masterwork of tension and suspense rather than gore. By the time he came back to overseeing Halloween 2 and cutting together The Fog, which he intended to be just a straight out ghost story, the times had changed, spurred on by his own movie, by Halloween. And so he added gore to Halloween 2, much to the chagrin of the director of that, and he went and he inserted gore scenes into The Fog as well. So that's why Dead and Buried, to my mind, vibes with The Fog a lot as well. There's there's a lot of atmosphere, there's tonal stuff, there's character work, there's creeping dread, there's suspense, there's a sense of what the fuck is going on, and then when revelations happen, well, what the fuck is happening now, interspersed with superb 80s gore effects. The effects by Stan Winston are freaking superb. He has done him and his team have done some model heads which are flat out the best that I've ever seen. I was reading on Internet Movie Database that one of the kills they sort of created and wanted extra effects for after Winston had left, and so they got some other crew in to do it, and it is the worst fake head, one of the worst fake heads I've ever seen in my entire life. When Winston saw the final cut of the movie, he must have been pulling his hair up, thinking that his name had gone in the opening credits against this awful, obvious fake head. But the ones him and his team crafted, intercut with shots of actual actors, just add a really, really extra squick factor because they're so realistic. I remember when I was talking about Deathline, Raw Meat, and talking about some really superb shots that Gary Sherman had set up, not least a really intricate long take that takes us from a tiny little dripping tap all the way around the interior of this cannibal's room as we spiral around and pull out. There are a couple of bravura shots like that here as well. One where we start off with Melody Anderson. Dale Arden from Flash Gordon is in this, outside her house, and pull in front of her as she goes up to her front door, and then we move. I had to watch it a couple of times. We move, as she puts the key in the lock, we move through the front door and then into her hall and then follow her. Superb. Even more standout than that, there's a sort of time-lapse shot of a body on the mortuary slab, the morticians reconstructing the face, that I kind of can't see the joints. Obviously, some of it's the actress and some of it's the model, and then it's seamless. It has to be seen to be believed. The kills are fantastic. The gore is fantastic, but the foggy, menacing atmosphere in the coastal town and wondering who knows what and who's involved in what, and the rising suspicion of the sheriff as he's starting to investigate these deaths, just goes hand in hand with the gore to create a little mystery that unfolds with some shocking revelations, some twists, some turns that I want you to discover for yourself rather than have me spoil them. Watch Dead and Buried. That's pretty much all I can say on the subject. Oh, and before I go, I've got one little final sweetener to try and seal the deal if for some reason you're still sat on the fence. One of the cast, one of the members of the community, is played by a very young pre-Freddy Krueger Robert Englund. Now, if that comparisons to John Carpenter's The Fog, 80s, gore special effects by Stan Winston, a fantastic atmosphere, suspense, amazing twists and turns aren't enough to make you want to see Dead and Buried if you haven't already seen it, then you just need to get the hell out of my living room. Get out.